I'm Les Reid, and in 2006 I identified this barge, Leicester Trader, as a wreck, and myself and my friend Rodney Clapson from Barton-on-Humber decided to buy it and try and restore it, and then to make it into a river heritage centre dedicated to the traffic on this river, which when I was a lad there were barges coming up here, up and down here, loaded and empty day and night. This is Leicester Trader. This is the last true Trent-sized barge to be built, and a Trent-sized dumb barge, and it hasn't got an engine in it. And this is the last throwback to the wooden sailing barges built over 100 years ago here in Newark. The same round bilge design, the same Humber style bow and stern. And the interesting thing about Leicester Trader is, when she was built at a time of transition in the shipyards, and so the complicated parts, the front and the bow and the stern, the front and the back, are all of the old-fashioned riveted construction. You can see the rivets here, and you can see here those lines of rivets on the inside of the boat. There are steel frames curving round. You don't see any rivets here because 10 years ago we overplated the whole of the bottom to make it last the 10 years, and we're here today for its 10-year survey to make it last another 10 years. And we're actually very pleased with the condition of the steel, which we thought might have been pitted a little bit, but we've used such good paint last time and this time we're very confident that another 10 years of life is in this boat. The other interesting thing at this end is the draft marks, and people always want to know how deep is the boat. So you don't want to be very deep when you're empty, because you want to be able to put cargo in it. So these letters, the letters which were traditionally Roman numerals, are 6 inches, and the bottom of the 2 is 2 foot draft, and the top of the 2 is 2 foot 6, and you go all the way up there. So at 6 foot there she'd be loaded 120 tons, and at 7 foot she'd have 140 tons in. This bit of the ship, as it comes round here, so we've got rivets there, and there's a weld line there, and that is the last riveted frame in the bow coming round, and all the frames from here on, you'll see there are no rivets, totally smooth, and the way you can tell from the inside whether it's a riveted frame or a welded, that they're the other way round. So the riveted frame has to have the back of the angle on the ship's side, and the welded frames have got the edge. So at a glance, if you know, you can see it. So we're down here towards the stern end of the boat. This position inside is still within the hold space, just before the turn goes in, which is designed to give water run to the rudder. Otherwise you can't steer it, and the better the shape at the stern end, drifting the water to the rudder, shaped like the fin of a fish, but equally this line here, we were talking about the riveted to the welded, and that is a welded joint. That is the last riveted frame in the stern end, and then all of this here is all welded, so there are no rivets here, but this construction is very strong, the way the frames work round on the inside, and they're all heated up and framed. The frames are bent to a pattern, and of course each one is different, and then they're pulled in with bolts and then reamed out to get the rivet holes in line, and then riveted up, and the man puts the rivet in from the inside and then they're pneumatically hammered up from the outside. But if you go back 100 years, it was all done with sledgehammers and young boys with fires heating the rivets. At 14 it was the young boys' job, and they had to have a brazier here, and then with tongs they used to throw them to the next lad, who used to collect it in a bucket and then pass it down to the man inside, who then put it through the hole. And you've got to do all of that as quick as possible before it cooled down, otherwise it wouldn't have knocked over and peened over. But of course the secret of the riveting is that when metal is heated it expands, and then when it's gone in it cools down and nips the plates together, making a watertight seal. Well, we're here a little bit further under the stern, and you can see yet again the way the ship is changing its shape. And what we've got here, should you not know, these are sacrificial anodes, and we put these on to protect the metal. In the days of the working barges they never would have bothered with these because they were regularly maintained, but we want this boat to last for another 10 years before we have to lift it out. So this one here, this is one of the old ones. This was put on in 2015, and you can see how it's eroded away. And in 2015 that looked exactly like this. This is a new one that we put on, and you have different metals for freshwater to salt water, and these are freshwater ones, magnesium. Still under the stern, and this is an easy place where you can see how the plates are together. And these two plates here are butted up, so that line there is the edge of that plate and the edge of that plate, and then those four lines of rivets, two in that plate and two in that plate. On the inside of the ship there's another plate that's called a butt strap, because that holds the two plates together that are butted up. And this here, this is an overlap plate. There is some shipyards had another method of doing that, but this is just overlapped, and then on the inside where the frame comes you have to put a little wedge in there to make it come round in a straight line. But that's, you know, it's all interesting things, how to get the shape from what were flat plates. So we're talking about the wooden sailing barges, the Trent-sized barges that were in the beginning this size, of like Leicester Trader, were built here at Newark, just above the lock in the old dock, at 82 foot 6 by 14 foot 6, and they were built by hand. They had no lifting equipment, but these sequence of pictures here show the sequence of the building. And the first picture in 1900 was when they were building boats and side slipping them into the backwater, which you will see if you walk back towards the lock. You will see that area from the girder bridge that's there now, which wasn't there then. But as things progressed, they had a dock at Newark which had two levels to it. So they had a lower level where boats could go in and the water could be run out into the backwater and they could have the bottoms worked on. But then on the high level they could land boats and just work on the sides, or they could build these wooden sailing barges and then side slip them to launch when they were completed into the dock. And these pictures here with the lineup of all the workers, we know some things about these people, but unfortunately as time passes there aren't the people to tell you the stories anymore, and it would have been nice to have had this picture 50 years ago, but I didn't. But this in May 1924. This was called the Thames. All of the Trent navigation barges that they built had English river names. There were some earlier ones that had worldwide river names. They were all like this at 82 foot with round bilges, which was the follow-on from the earlier Trent catches which had square bilges. But these built at Newark were like this. And this model, which turned up on eBay, I can only imagine that only time there would be any reason to build this model would be at the time when the boat was being built. And this was the sort of thing that they gave the apprentices to do, to show the shape of the ship, the shape of the bow that they would expected to come out on the built ships, and the shape of the stern. And the stern needed to be a better shape than the bow. The bow didn't really matter because you needed the fuller part of the ship to carry cargo. But if you didn't have, this is called rung, if you didn't have rung to get the water to the rudder, then they were difficult to steer. So there's lots of things in there. Everything is done for a reason. And of course here is the position for the mast that would have been on it. And the mast in a keel is 1/3 from the forward end of the hatch. So there would have been a beam there with a lutchet with the mast in it. Everything were made to lower down for bridges, and there'd be another beam there. Then these hatches had to come off, and they were in sections of this type which were curved and called carling hatches. And so you would have a man on this side and a man and the mate on the other side to lift them off and move them to one side for loading cargo. But you could move them all to one end and open the lot out, or you could just open a little bit. If there was a chance of it raining, you'd only want to open a little bit to save the cargo getting wet. So the progression with the work in the dockyard, they found it easier and cheaper to buy steel barges from the early 1900s to work with the wooden sailing barges, but the Newark yard had to have the technology to repair them. So these are two here being repaired, and that's Bill Hardy, who I knew, and that is the fire. He's there heating the rivets up to then pass down into the boat for it to be passed through for Bill to rivet it up with a riveting gun. So this picture here shows a Newark built wooden sailing barge, and the ones with the square sails, they're called keels, and it's a derivative of a very old name, but in general the square sail ones, they're keels. And the Trent barges, because they were longer than a lot of them, they only had a mast that fitted the boat, and it suited to just have one sail, whereas some of the other barges had a longer mast and had a second topsail. But this, and we can't identify it, this is also being towed, assisted by the Trent tug, the Little John, and because the river was so shallow, it had a steam engine geared onto two propellers that were quite small, so it was only it didn't get stuck on the bottom. So this square sailed, single square sailed 82 footer is the same as one of these, but we can't identify which one it is. But it would have been built somewhere between the First War and the 1920s to be that size and shape. But the difference is in the types of sailing barge that were found on the Humber, and each of the big four major waterways in the country had their own local vessels. So these Humber vessels of this shape, this is a Sheffield size sloop, and the sloop had fore and aft sails, not square, and the mast was in a slightly different position, and it is just the same in its shape, except in These were 82 feet long by 14 foot 6, and the Sheffield boat is 61 foot 6 by 15 foot 6. So they were no good coming up here, and the Trent boats couldn't go to Sheffield either. But if we come to an earlier type, this is what was known as a catch, and it was a corrupt name from ketch, because if they had the need and the wind was of a situation where you needed more sail, they rigged right on the stern end and almost jury rigged another mast with another sail on. But this shows this has got a full rig and a full mast with a topsail. But they were the old Trent size at 74 foot 6 by 14 foot 3, and that would not only go to Nottingham, it would have been able to have gone to Lincoln as well, but it still couldn't go to Sheffield. But if we come to this other one, it's just quite a nice painting. This shows a Sheffield size keel, always with a cogboat, part of the kit, and that has got a longer mast, so that would be capable of having a topsail on there, the same as this one. But obviously if there wasn't a need for it, they wouldn't rig it. So we're talking here about an Upper Trent boat, and these were the sort that the Hull boats would lighten into. So if they came from Hull with 100 tons of cargo drawing 5 foot, and there was only 4 foot of water over the shallow part of the river above Newark, where there were no big locks until the 1920s, they would take part of the cargo out of the Hull boat. So the Hull boat would get to Newark with 100 tons in, and then they would split that cargo, and there might be 2 Upper Trent boats and the Hull boat, the 3 of them containing that 100-ton cargo. But these type would fit what's generally known as double narrow locks. So as you go inland and the waterways were developed depending on the amount of water that was suitable for the locks, in the Midlands they went to narrow boats, which were 72 foot and 7 foot wide. So these Upper Trent boats would fit into one of those locks that was made to take 2 narrow boats. So this is 14 foot wide but only 72 feet long, and these would carry 40 or 50 tons. But unlike the Hull boat, they didn't have any hatches or covers, only just loose covers thrown over the cargo that might have been perishable. So they didn't have lee boards, they only had a light mast, and this piece here is called a lutchet, so you could drop the mast down and take the mast completely out. So, and then you've got the fore roller is used for heaving up the mast, and it's also used for what's called a warping line. So if you needed to move the boat where you didn't have the sails, like coming out of a lock, you'd run the line out off that winch and then wind the boat along with it. So all these bits are functional in different ways, and they only had one main beam. And of course the main beams in a barge, not only are they holding it together, they're holding it from the water pressure pushing it in. So the deeper it goes, the more water pressure there is on the sides, which is why you need beams at deck level. So these only had a very light sail, and this, interesting the way they've done this, that's an easy way and quick way of shortening sail without actually taking the sail down, and that's called in sailing terms scandalising. But these were very useful, and this size would go on the Grantham Canal, on the Erie-Wash Canal, on the River Soar to Leicester, and up to above Sawley, which was the head of the broad Trent navigation. And after that all those navigations become narrow navigations. This was built in 1904, and as I said, this would have been built, I think, by one of the apprentices, and it is quite likely, but I can't prove it, that one of these lads who were apprentice on this picture might have built that model. I would like to prove that, but I can't. But the other interesting thing, this being the first 82 footer with the round bilges to be built here in Newark before anybody else built the steel boats, and here we are standing in Leicester Trader, which is the last to be built true Trent-size barge and the last one to be worked up this river with a cargo in and towed by another boat with an engine in the old way in 1979. So this is the beginning and you're standing in what is the end. This one's called the Umber Bell.